no one's gonna come out of transportation, frankly. That's where I just came from, so it is a packed room. Who's here? Oh, Senator Barker, I didn't even see you back there. Thank you so much.
I told all the rest of them to stay away from my
Good play.
And you have one bill, is that correct?
One bill, this is the bill that your subcommittee looked at last week, and we talked about making an amendment. We do have an amendment in nature of a substitute here, so I have that to present to you now.
Is there a motion to?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
All right, and what the
If you can speak to your amendment.
I know what the amendment is. Basically, what the amendment would do is permit the student who's pursuing an advanced studies diploma and who has an individualized education program, an IEP, specifies a credit accommodation for world language to substitute the 2 standard units of credit in computer science for the 2 standard units of credit in world language.
So it narrows it down now to
Yes.
individuals who have the IEP. Only they would be allowed to do
I
that.
know that's a fairly broad category, that means a learning disability or a variety of other issues, autism, things like that, that may impact upon the ability to become proficient in another language quickly.
Mhm.
So, and it does say that the school and the counselor are supposed to talk with the parents and make sure they understand there may be some impact upon college applications, but this would enable them to get an advanced studies diploma.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone that wishes to speak for the bill? And I assume you wish to speak on?
Well, we're not, we very much appreciate Senator Barker's work in amending the bill, and particularly the very precise wording of this.
Yes.
It addresses many of the problems. The only thing that we would oppose this for is that computer science, which is a STEM course, is not an equivalent of a world language or foreign language course. My experience in college tells me that students who are exempt from foreign language requirements for various reasons substitute instead intercultural communication, international studies, area studies, things that may not be available in all high schools. So we would prefer not computer science, but appropriate alternative coursework.
And I'm sorry, if you could just remind us of your name and your affiliation.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Sharon Cariello. I'm a retired University of Richmond faculty member. I'm the advocacy chair for the Foreign Language Association of Virginia.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So are they able to substitute those classes already?
The very few students in my experience who have been able to substitute for a foreign language requirement at the college level are allowed to, but at college level, you have a lot of international studies, intercultural communication courses. At high schools, it may be more difficult. So world history, intercultural communication, it kind of depends on the curriculum of the high school, but appropriate alternative coursework would cover however their IEP could be written.
Thank you. And you
Emily
wish to
Webb,
speak?
Emily Webb, the Department of Education. We currently do not offer any credit accommodations for the advanced studies diploma, which this bill speaks to, but it is very narrowly drawn to just those students that have a credit accommodation for world language, and the IEP team would decide if that credit accommodation was appropriate in this instance.
Yes, which we really appreciate the precision with which this has been written.
Yes.
The good news is that if things play out well this year, we'll have virtual education in Virginia, and we can talk about this as we come back next year and see what might be a good substitute.
Okay. So appropriate substitute or not just computer science would be our friendly proposed friendly amendment would be to say appropriate alternative coursework.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on the floor? Is there a motion? All in favor?
Aye. It's an aye.
So 5 ayes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. And I believe Senator Vogel is here now?
Senator Barker. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I have Senate Bill 1040, and I bring this to you at the request of the City of Winchester. And they have asked that the City of Winchester be added to the code section under Section C, which would authorize them to compensate school board members at a salary not to exceed $4,500 each year. And that's all the bill does.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. 5 ayes.
Thank you.
That was
Thank
quick.
you, Madam Chair.
That
That might be the
one.
easiest thing
done,
I have the
Senator Vogel.
Yeah, please tell the City of Winchester that I undertook this Herculean effort.
It was your impressive rhetorical skills that convinced us all. Are there any other patrons here today? Yet. Well, I can go ahead and get started. Or is there anybody else on the committee that has a bill today?
Who needed a patron?
We asked for a senator, I'm not sure why you
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you, Senator. And which bill are you presenting today to us?
Whichever one you want to take first. Start with school discipline reform. Yep. That's fine. And I believe there's a substitute.
What number
That
is
is
that?
1020.
1020. SB 1020, but with a substitute. Second, all in favor? Aye. Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for hearing me on Senate Bill 1020. Basically, in a nutshell, as you know, Madam Chair, I've been trying to lead where we're trying to do school reform on discipline, stop the pipeline of from the classroom to the jailhouse. We have passed some significant reforms. It took a couple of years of convincing, but we got both House and Senate to agree to limiting the number of suspensions that we have for children, K through 3, and even up to 6th grade. And I think those are great models. What we also want to do, because we're talking with the school systems as well, is how do we put some tools in the toolbox where alternatives can also be available for the school board. So Senate Bill 1020 in a nutshell creates an alternative school discipline process, which allows for any incidents which are not of the criminal variety, but what we're trying to do is avoid what's the one they love to charge, disorderly conducts and those kind of things from occurring, where there can be an alternative option for the school where they're not involving law enforcement, giving the parties an option to enter into a mutually agreed upon process. And that process will hold the student accountable for non-criminal offenses through a mutually agreed upon standard that both the student, their parent, and the school enter into and agree to as a way to make atonement, also keep them in school so they're not falling behind in their education, keep them in the peer groups and making sure that we're doing the best we can to absolutely get them educated and correct the behavior without stigmatizing the student who may be going through a lot more different things that might be the root cause of these things. Now, if there is a student that successfully completes the alternative school discipline process, then no principal shall report that to law enforcement, okay? If the parties fail to agree to the process or fail to successfully complete the alternative school discipline process, then it is permissive the principal may report the incident to local law enforcement. This is kind of a diversion we're trying in a new, different way where it's collaborative, not authoritarian. And so this is what the bill is in 1020.
Thank you. Are there any individuals that wish to speak for the bill?
Madam Chairman, my name's Chris Allen. I'm with The Middle Resolution. We've been working over the last couple of years to help build this bill. We think that it is a good middle ground and offers, as the senator said, an option for school discipline. The people we've collaborated with include 2 school board members, one in Virginia Beach, one in Franklin County, and multiple members of the NAACP in 3 counties in the state of Virginia. So we would support this wholeheartedly.
Thank you. Are there any other comments in support of the bill? Are there any individuals who wish to speak in opposition to the bill?
No, Madam Chair, I don't have an opposition, I have a, I don't know, a question maybe?
No questions. No questions for you.
Well, we wanna get it right, if we're gonna advance this, I wanna get it right, and so I'm concerned. So on line 13, mutually agreed upon between the involved parties, are we talking about including the victim, if there is a victim, or not?
Madam Chair, I'd answered the gentlelady by saying the understanding of my thought process and our thought process was the parties are the school, which has the obligation to teach the student and also renders the discipline, and the student and the student's parents. One would contemplate that on the school side, the school would be taking into consideration those issues regarding to any victim, if there is a victim, and that would be a part of the implied process on their end of the deal. Ultimately, if there is an alleged victim in this matter, certainly we're trying to discipline someone for behavior, correct that behavior, and also serve in the way that we want to deter further behavior that would not create any more harm to this victim or anybody else.
I honestly think that this is one of those situations where we need to trust our schools. They do a good job, mostly. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, but I think we can have some trust that they have discretion to be able to sort out how to seek resolution in a situation. And we're really just encouraging them, empowering them with an alternative to going to the resource officer of the police. And so unless you feel really strongly, I think we should just trust our schools here.
Madam Chair, if I may respond, look, what we've seen, especially in rural areas and inner cities, is that it really comes down to this, with resource officers, it's an all or nothing proposition, disorderly conduct. I cannot tell you how many cases, I think part of my college education for one of my children is paid on these kind of charges for our minors. And quite frankly, it's a kind of record that I don't think any student should have. There's a stigma which then comes through going through the court process. You are then abandoning the child to the court process, not trying to engage the child into corrective, positive behaviors that involve more of an intimate setting rather than the cold process of a court of law where there is a prosecutor and a law enforcement officer and an attorney for the defense and a judge. And Madam Chair, if I may say, having been in that courtroom for 25 years, I've seen a distinct change in the way that justice is administered and the outcomes for those children. What we're trying to actually do is not take away enforcement of the schools. We're trying to say, look, you may, if you want, create an alternative process that doesn't involve having a child, having a petition filed of a criminal misdemeanor like a Class 1 disorderly conduct, which disorderly conduct is the catch-all phrase, that is the catch-all charge, which if you know the specific elements of disorderly conduct, 9 times out of 10, they don't fit under what disorderly conduct is in terms of creating a breach of actions to amounting to a level of breach of the peace, to the level that a conviction may be undertaken or found. So in that instance, the child is charged, the parents pay a price, or the child is appointed a court-appointed attorney. Maybe the half the time, or more than half the time, the activity of that child does not rise to the level of disorderly conduct. That child is then found not guilty, not delinquent, and therefore, what has happened? We have not corrected the behavior. I certainly try to do it with my underage client, and I try to lecture him, but not every lawyer's like that. We try to get him back on the right path. So what we're trying to do is actually, before we throw away the child into the court system, we say, we have an extra responsibility here. Try to correct behavior, make it right, and then from that the child grows, we don't have that behavior again, and we have a successful child that becomes a productive member of our community when they graduate. Right now, for the school system, Senator Donovan, this does not order them to do it. It merely says they can do it if they want. They can continue, unfortunately, to charge them with disorderly conduct. Or they can try an alternative method, which may work. And if it doesn't work, they can throw it out and go back to that old method.
Madam Chair. To the patron.
I'm sorry, I was That's right. This is why I used to get charged with disorderly conduct in school. I was not paying attention.
I was about to say.
Yes, that's right.
Put you in the system now.
You can put me in the corner if you like to. Detention.
This just creates another tool to help us to alleviate the school to prison pipeline.
Madam Chair, I'd answer the gentle lady by saying exactly. And it's a tool for the school and for the student. And it's not a requirement. They can use it or not use it. I would hope they would.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments?
So, Madam Chair, given the senator's response to my question, which I appreciate, and kind of looking at this further, I actually think that we have the leeway in here to not only determine who are the involved parties, but to figure out the process. So, at the risk of shocking Senator Stanley, I actually I support the bill.
He's going to become disorderly.
But he's not a student, so we can call. Anyway, we support this.
Thank you, thank you. Is there a motion on the floor? Oh, there are more individuals who wish to speak to the bill? I'm sorry.
With Legal Aid Justice Center, just having a moment to absorb the substitute. I thank Senator Stanley, who is a champion of school discipline, and I want to record what he just said about disorderly conduct and play it for the courts committee at a later date. But given a new substitute, we would support the bill.
All in favor? Aye. That's 5 ayes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
You have a second bill?
No, I think I should just quit right there.
Split harder.
It'll never happen again. Madam Chair, members of the committee, this is Senate Bill 1091. This is another permissive bill, and it comes from our areas where in smaller counties, we don't have the financial resources necessarily always to have student or school resource officers there, and especially when it comes to events. As we've seen in these events, they are soft targets for people that wish to do harm to children, wish to do them ill. And certainly what we have is a number of people that are police officers or certified retired police officers who still maintain their certifications, who live and work in those areas. Even, quite frankly, and part of the genesis of this bill was retired officers who have children who are at these schools that would love to be able to provide security. And those schools would take that security if this was allowed. So this is a bill just allows local school boards and even private or religious schools to employ volunteer school security officers, giving these officers the same authority and restrictions as provided to full-time school security officers at events. What we're talking about is football games, May Day, the color run, the times where the children are out and where there are access points where someone who wants to harm them can do them harm. So this just gives, especially for less affluent counties like the ones I serve, the ability to retain these and provide more security for the children.
Senator, I just have a question. Would they also then be bound by the same regulations that govern all volunteers who enter the school premises and participate with the children?
Madam Chair, I'd answer you by saying absolutely. It gives them the same authorities and it's the same restrictions that come with it. Yes, and really it's not just willy-nilly anybody who has a concealed carry. This is a active or retired police officer who maintains their certification. Not the ones that have retired and not maintain the certification.
Is there anyone that wishes to speak on behalf of the bill? Anyone that wishes to speak in opposition?
Oh, Amy.
Madam Chair, Committee, Kathy Burke from the Virginia Education Association. We appreciate the school divisions who want to have armed security. However, we believe school resource officers continue to be the best way to go about that. They are trained on how to work with students. We have put specific training in place to ensure that they don't intervene in codes of conduct violations, and we're separating school discipline criminality, and I'm very afraid, and the VA is very concerned, that this bill undoes all of the good work that this committee and the General Assembly has taken up over the last few sessions to be opposed to.
Thank you.
Mr. Engel, is the Justice Center, sure what the senator is doing this to me today. We have to oppose the bill, mostly for the consensus Commissioner here stated. I just don't think we have the kind of, need that some of these folks suggest we do in terms of putting this kind of security in our schools unless they are under exposed to very stringent standards that we have. There's no security officers and school resource officers already in the ability to care for those positions. So we would oppose the change.
Madam Chair, if I may respond, if
Yes.
you look under 22.1, 280.2:1, in the line 681, anybody who would be authorized by the school boards to volunteer must follow along the same qualifications, certifications that an active duty police officer would. So unfortunately, we don't have, if you look at the school budgets for Patrick County, anybody who lived in Northern Virginia would laugh. We're talking about $5-6 million a year. So we don't have that kind of money to do that in every school. But we do have retired law enforcement that have the same certifications and would qualify under 22.1, 280.2:1, who are willing to volunteer. And we would expect them to maintain their certifications and have the same mindset as if our sheriff's office would then deploy the school resource officer. And most of the time, Madam Chair, I would say, most of the time from what I'm hearing is that these going to be parents, or people that have a close affiliation with the school, so they have, a stake in the safety.
Thank you. Yes.
Madam Chairwoman, Holly Floyd, Deputy Secretary of Education and Administration, opposes the bill. The voluntary nature of these individuals means that the local school board doesn't have them, the ability to compel their attendance, et cetera, as normal school board employees, like an SSO, and they're not the employees of law enforcement, like an SRO, which are the existing pathways for armed personnel nurses.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Andrew Ballard, Gene Center, the reasons we just heard, we don't support this bill.
Madam Chair, Beth Hill with Middle and High School principals. Many of you have recognized that there is sometimes a blurring of lines between discipline, criminal, et cetera. We feel like this could add another line of confusion, and also agree that the volunteer nature of this job is problematic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Madam Secretary. James Christian with the Virginia Center for School and Campus Safety at the Department of Criminal Justice Services, and we oppose the bill for the reasons stated.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Lloyd House with the Coalition of Captain Collins, to oppose the bill for the reasons stated. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, what I'm to understand is that we're in a mindset when it comes to gun safety, that we're going to leave these areas that do not have the financial resources to bring school resource officers who are armed, or sheriff's departments who do not have the numbers. We have a 19% attrition rate in our sheriff's department, to leave these children exposed and unprotected. And just because one place can afford it and it's okay, I don't think it's fair that one place that can't afford it but have people that are willing to provide that security for our most precious natural resource are deprived of that because they can't employ them. But it is in the language an employment in the sense of volunteer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Is there a motion on the floor?
Move to report.
Is there a second?
Equal second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No.
This
Three.
could be yes or no, so I can write it down for posterity. Thank you.
3 noes and 2 ayes. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm so glad I was your guinea pig of patronage. It's nice to see all of you as always.
You did a wonderful job.
You too got it. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that some of our patrons have, if I could just go in order of signage now, I think we had, unless they all disappeared on me. We'll just go hear from you then. I think everybody else left.
Everybody's in the committee or subcommittee around. So, Madam Chairman, this is not gonna be as controversial as the previous bill. I have some school board, not school board, but school superintendent representatives here. Northern Neck is, as a region, came together and created a technical center. geographically, the temperature changes from one end to the other with weather systems somewhat uniquely. As a result, they found themselves over the years falling into different rules of when they could start the school year. So right now, not all the members of the Northern Mac Technical Center, not all the counties can start their school year at the same time under the current rules. So this would give them the ability to, if one jurisdiction was not able to start their school at the same time as the others, they could move it up. It would be an exception so that everybody could go into the technical center at the same time. Did I get that right, Greg? Yes.
Is there anyone here who wishes to speak in favor of the bill?
Yes, Madam Chair. Day members, my name is Greg Smith, and I'm the superintendent for the Richmond County Public School System, and I'm also the executive superintendent for the Northern Memphis Technical Center. All of the 6 partnering school boards, as well as superintendents, have agreed to this legislation request, and basically, we would like to create a common school calendar as well as a common school schedule to better serve all of our rural students. As the committee may know, many of the regional programs, which the Northern Mac Tech Center is the hub for 3 regional programs, are slated on a 2.5-hour schedule, which one schedule is in the AM and the second in the PM. And the 4x4 semester block schedule is the best match for those AM and PM schedules. The current Labor Day legislation does not allow us to complete a full day semester before Christmas break, thus the request.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there anyone that wishes to speak?
Madam Chair, Stacey Hamian with the School Board Association, we also support the legislation. I know that the chairwoman wasn't here last session, but I think the other senators will recall legislation that was passed last year. And we, when we were dealing with that, we were trying to make sure that we covered all these kinds of scenarios and just, the way it works. And so this is one that, frankly, I think kind of fell through the cracks, and this is a good fix just to allow them to do, I think, what we intended to let everyone follow. So we would ask that you move the change of the
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. That'll be 5 ayes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. And Senator Obenshain, I think you're next.
It's such difficulty figuring out which education committee to come to. Well, I'm gonna tell the right one.
This is the best one.
I would undoubtedly.
And which bill?
Senate Bill 691. After the shooting at the Marjorie Stoneman School in Florida, Florida looked at a wide variety of initiatives, and in 2018, it passed legislation creating the Guardian Program, a voluntary program pursuant to which schools could elect to participate. It is a program that is highly regulated, requires a high degree of training. What it does is puts a qualified, highly trained person in the schools, armed, in a position to respond immediately in the event of a school shooting. I do not believe in just arming teachers and putting guns in schools just for the sake of putting guns in schools, but Virginia's, we demonstrated in tongue-in-cheek way earlier today, is a very diverse state, and it's economically diverse, and population is diverse. And we have many school divisions around the state that are very poor. Some, like one of the counties I represent, has 700 students in the entire school system, and probably 2 deputy sheriffs on the road in the county at any given time. And if there were a shooting in that school, it could be 20 minutes before a sheriff's deputy got to the school. And particularly in these small school divisions, finances are a huge issue. In that school division, they said, look, we want to pay our teachers more, we want raise, but just please understand that a 2% raise for us puts an enormous hardship on us because of our tax base. And the same thing applies with respect to putting school resource officers in the schools. It's highly expensive and very difficult, particularly when you have 3 schools in a school division and county that's that small. We also have school security officers that we are allowed to put in the schools as well. However, they are paid personnel. They have to have 10-year or have to have law enforcement credentials within the previous 10 years. And in some of those counties, both the pay and the lack of availability of adequately credentialed personnel is a real problem. So I put in Senate Bill 691, which is essentially the same as the Florida Guardian Program. There are 41 counties in Florida that have signed up and are participating in the Guardian Program in Florida. And this gives the state, gives DCJS enormous control over the process, and we want to make sure that the state and our public safety personnel are comfortable with the training that's being provided, the standards that are being applied, with the people who are going through this process, in order to make sure that we're doing this the right way and not the wrong way. I always think that there are advantages and disadvantages to being the leading edge of the wave. In this instance, we have the luxury of knowing that other states have tried this and have tried it very successfully. And I know that the shooting in the church in Texas is one that's been often cited over the past month or two, but it's a perfectly analogous situation. Having somebody there the instant that a shooting starts is a whole lot better than having somebody there 10 minutes later in order to be able to stop it. So I've tried to do this the right way to respect the ability of our law enforcement professionals here in Richmond to set standards across the state, but to allow for enough flexibility that our school divisions around the state can make the choice that's right for them within the confines of those parameters.
Thank you, Senator, yes.
We have to go to that bill and come back, but there's one request that I wonder if you'd consider on this bill. Instead of making it training for new teachers, it's just a request from some of my localities, would you consider setting it up? New teachers have such high volume of education that they have to have. What if you made this mandatory for all teachers within a fixed time period from the time of the bill's passage, instead of or their hiring date, so that it got done, but it just wasn't necessarily it was part of the professional development instead of new teacher requirement.
This is where is that? I don't think that's in this bill. I don't think there's any mandate for new teachers. This allows the.
My bad.
I agree to that.
Done.
That's an easy ask.
You agree to the friendly amendment?
Absolutely.
Okay.
If necessary.
Are there any comments from the floor?
My apologies. You agree?
That it be available to all teachers?
No, I'm sorry. There is no, she was speaking to the wrong bill.
Yes.
It's not in, it's not in here. I was just saying it's easy for me to agree to, because if, I would agree that I'll impose no mandate on new teachers.
My
This is something
apologies, I
anyway.
misunderstood, I thought you
I'm
were
sorry.
accepting the amendment.
A little too subtle.
Too subtle for this old head. Is there anyone that wishes to speak for the bill? Is there anyone that wishes to speak in opposition?
Madam Chair, members of the Virginia Center for Public Safety, while we appreciate Senator's laser-like focus on the small number of children that are shot in schools, we're concerned about this bill. I'm not sure what $500 being paid on top of the salary of a school resource officer would do to increase efficacy. The only thing I can think of is that perhaps the gentleman who was at Parkland, who did not do anything to assist on the day, even though it was his job, might think again if he got an extra $500, but I very much doubt it. So we oppose this bill.
Thank you.
Jim Kathy Hirsch with the Virginia Education Association. Our concerns with this bill are very similar to the concerns you heard from the previous bill, so we oppose.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I need to look at the Legal Justice Center. I appreciate what you're trying to do here. I think we would oppose the bill for some of the same reasons and understand this bill. And one thing I would just say too is, I know we have a lot of funding priority questions in the General Assembly, and if we, in talking about school safety, it would be our hope that we kind of expand the definition of what we think of as school safety to include things like providing counselors and social workers and psychologists and support staff that can really create the kinds of environments that keep our schools safe as well.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Holly Coy from the Secretary of Education's office, again, the administration opposes this bill as well. There are clear pathways to SROs and SSOs being approved in code that are clearly established in the school code.
Okay, thank you.
Just quickly, that when we do house because we have the same incentive to volunteers.
Okay, thank you. Did you wish to
So if I
respond?
could just close, the county of Parkland showed up about 10 minutes late, 10 minutes after the shooting started. And he wouldn't have been able to have stopped the shooting to begin with. He should have intervened and could have probably saved additional lives. But that's not the answer. And we've got to do something to make sure that in the event that there is a school shooting, Virginia Tech was a school shooting, make no mistake about it. But the schools we're talking about are close campuses, and somebody there is going to have the opportunity to stop it. Adding additional social workers is very nice, and I think it's very important that we add counselors and social workers in school. But if somebody shows up with a gun and starts shooting, they ain't going to stop it. And this is simply a proposal that's going to help the small school divisions, the ones that can't afford it, the ones that need some help in making sure that we're putting qualified personnel in those schools and those sparsely populated counties to save the lives of children.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the committee members?
Move to report, second by Peak. All in favor? Aye.
All opposed? No. That's 3 noes and 2 ayes.
Okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
And I believe I saw, yes, Senator Mason.
Morning, ma'am. Madam Chair, Senate Bill 680.
Please tell me it's the afternoon.
If you start by telling me what day it is, I'll hone in from there. So a couple years ago, 2 years ago, legislation was passed allowing public school teachers with a provisional license to extend their 3-year provisional status for 2 1 year at a time. Thought it included everybody. Turns out it did not include or did not cover private school teachers for students with disabilities. So if you look at the bill and look at paragraph number 2, that's what we did. Paragraph number 3 is our addition, where we're trying to replicate the language as much as possible, but referencing the definition, the subsection that defines schools for students with disabilities.
Are there any questions from committee? Is there anyone that wishes to speak about this bill or to this bill?
Move to report.
All in favor?
Aye.
5 ayes.
There's some mental relaxation for you, Madam Chair. Thank y'all very much. Easy, right? Thank y'all very much.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any other patrons on the floor here? Let's go ahead and take a look at my bill, which is SB 910. And there is an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Here.
All in favor of the substitute? Aye. So, just to give you a little bit of background about SB 910. It is an administration bill that seeks to expand the number of support resources for our English language learners. So what we have seen from our research is that high quality language instruction for EL students has been shown to improve academic outcomes and language proficiencies, but Virginia only requires only one specialized teacher for about every 59 EL students. And other southern states have a better staffing ratio for their EL students, and this includes Georgia, which has 1 to 7, North Carolina, which now has 1 to 20, and Tennessee, which has 1 to 30. Insufficient staffing and resources is really having clear consequences on our students. The pass rates for EL students on SOL reading test were a staggering 47.5 percentage points lower than non-EL students in the most recent 2019 test. And this represents the largest gap of any major student subgroup in the state SOL data. SOL math pass rates for EL students are also similarly lower. They're 26% points lower than non-EL students, and so these gaps are getting significantly worse actually over the past several years. EL students make up only 2% of our gifted student population, even though they make up nearly 9% of the student overall population. And so in a comprehensive review of research on EL funding adequacy, about 70 studies. Most studies recommend a much higher funding levels than Virginia is currently providing, and this demonstrates that we are fall short of what is adequate. So this bill seeks to expand the funding and the support to provide greater support for our EL students. For each EL learner, we will have one position per 25 students, excuse me, and one position for each identified as proficient level 2, one position for 30, and so forth as the bill defines. Is there anyone here that wishes to speak for the bill? Secretary Carmen.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. Honorable members of the committee, I will not speak at length about this. I can go on and on and on, because I know you have a billion other bills to hear, but this bill, thank you, Madam Chair, for being chief patron from the Senate side on the bill. The governor is supporting this bill and also has added budget item in the budget as well to support this specific piece of legislation, so it has the administration's full support. I just wanna, on a personal note, say that having been an EL learner, it is quite difficult for a lot of our new immigrants when they come here to learn a new language. It can be challenging academically, social, emotionally, it can be really challenging and so forth. So this is the right thing to do for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I ask for your full support for this piece of legislation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Secretary. Yes.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Michael Miller, Fairfax County Schools, we very much appreciate you bringing the legislation.
Thank you.
Lila Wise, representing Arlington, Alexandria, and Falls Church. We support this and are especially pleased that you recognize the challenges for the kids who come in with even less. So thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, Chris Duncan with the Commonwealth Institute. We're in strong support of this legislation. In regards to all the wonderful data points that you provided in your summary, I would also point that when you look at SOL pass rates and on-time graduation rates, this is the subgroup with the largest disparities, showing that our staffing is definitely not adequate at the present moment. In addition to that, we have not addressed our staffing standards since 2005 for how we staff our EL instructors, and the number of EL students in our schools has almost doubled since then. I think it's an important thing for us to look at.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Kathy Berger, the Virginia Education Association. Association, because of all of the data points you've heard today, our members who work with our English language learners have been begging for changes and improvements to the ratio. So we appreciate this legislation and we support it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from committee members?
Move to approve.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. That is 5 ayes. Are there any other patrons that have joined us? Can we call some patrons?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Everyone, Representative Hangers, and then Sarah Mahoney.
We will sit tight for a few minutes and wait. Are you all done with transportation? You're so
Found one.
Thank you, Senator Hager. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm there.
Thank you.
Oh, now they're all coming in.
Mine are fairly simple, whether you like them or not, you won't take you long to dispose of. The, Senate Bill 594, I hope you like them. Senate Bill 594, deals with school safety grants, and it basically broadens it a bit. These grants were set up for public school security. Grant was created in 2013, and certain things are eligible, inside the school primarily, and this basically would classify security-related devices located outside the school building property, school-related, security-related devices on school buses as eligible, for these particular grants. My understanding, the grant program is not oversubscribed, and that this would be possible to do. And, the equipment on school buses, parking lots, football stands, things of that sort. There may be someone here from DOE that we want to speak with, but it's my understanding, that they are not oversubscribed, and, this would be good additional uses for, this, grant program.
Thank you. Is there anyone that wishes to speak for or in opposition to the bill?
Madam Chair, Stacey Henning School Association, we thank the Senator for bringing the bill and, any additional flexibility, if there's money, that's available and additional, ways that we can use it to, better, ensure the safety in our schools, we appreciate that additional flexibility the bill offers.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5 ayes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, doing one.
All right, the, 595 is related, and I guess they could have been encompassed in a single bill, but this is a little bit different direction dealing with safety. And this would add, vaping detectors, to those that would be eligible for the grant program. It's been brought to my attention, y'all perhaps have your own experiences that, the kids are, and these are dangerous, obviously, but they're using these devices in restrooms, and it's hard to detect that they have these devices that actually can detect these things, and, they may be sabotaged as far as vandalism, but I would think that having the potential to install these with the grant program would be helpful for the safety of children
detector.
It's like a smoke detector, but it
Just as how it is,
detects,
okay.
like the, whatever the aroma from vapes or whatever, the smoke, whatever that's coming out of it.
Detect, okay.
It would be nice to just combine your two bills together, since they're coming from the same, part of the code.
Could have saved a piece of paper, but.
For the same reasons as the last bill, we also support the flexibility.
Okay.
Move to report.
All in favor? Aye.
Those are reluctant ayes.
Too many detectives.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. So I believe Senator Evan, you came in first. We will hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Last year, this subcommittee passed, or actually 2 years ago, that we passed SB 605, which was mandated under the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015, that public schools could not assist a former employee of that school in obtaining a new job if they had reason to know that there was probable cause that the individual seeking new employment was engaged in sexual misconduct with a minor or a student in violation of the law. So this year, I'm here to talk about private schools, and there's a back and forth with this. We know teachers, for example, there's a case in Ohio that involved a private school teacher who was forced to resign because of inappropriate conduct with female students. The teacher then received a letter of recommendation from the school, calling him an outstanding teacher, and then he's hired at a public school in a neighboring district where he's convicted for sexual battery against a 6-year-old girl, 6th grade girl. And, excuse me, that was occurred in public schools. But it's not just public schools. It's a system-wide failing. We've seen this in private schools, and then we've seen one with a private school teacher, similar to the scenario I described, in a prestigious all-girls school in LA. Then hired in Marlborough, Massachusetts, who's actually molested and impregnated one of the students. So 10 states have either enacted or proposed laws to address this phenomenon, which is called pass the trash. In other words, you're having a bad actor, a horrible teacher, a sexual predator, who's then moving on to another school or institution. And when we allow it to happen at our private schools, it's the same, it's just as bad. And what we're talking about here was private schools that are, I believe they're called certified or, I don't know my language here. Schools that have been accredited by the Commonwealth. And that's the gist of the bill, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Yes.
What is an agent?
An agent of the school.
Private school.
On line 53.
There, and again, repeat it again, I just, I'm trying to itemize each person that works
Sure.
there.
Someone representing the school who has reason to know that there was sexual misconduct that was founded.
If they're not employed or directly responsible to the school, I don't know how the school has control over them.
Well, that could be taken out, but basically, we already have contractor, so they're responsible to the school. I don't know if that means some kind of employment person, but,
If you're amenable to taking out agent, I think you list all the, or you know.
yeah, and the only thing you might consider would be to ask counsel if, and I don't know if in the public portion, if we use the word agent, but I'm fine if we wanna take it out or make it parallel.
Madam Chair, this was modeled on the public school version, so agent wasn't there, I don't have exactly on the public school.
So it replicates the language in another part.
Yeah, so it could come out or stay in, I don't really,
I just think parallel with the other law is fine, but whatever the will of the committee is fine with me.
I would recommend keeping the language similar if it's in the other part of the code regarding
Great,
public
okay.
schools.
Madam Chair.
Senator Donovan agrees. Yes.
Question.
school setting, is there some kind of immunity? Or is it just that they're covered by the school policy? If there's a complaint. And that was the concern of private schools, if somebody inquires and they say, yeah, this guy's had a sexual problem, that they might face some liability. Is there anything in the public, or is it just the fact that they're covered by the school policy?
Well, do you want to answer on the public school policy first?
Again, Madam Chair, this looks just like the public school policy, but it's 22.1-79.8. We're really just replicating that it's changed.
And I think, Madam Chairman, if I may, and Senator Emmett can help me, I think that had a lot of wordsmithing when we passed it, because it started out, with more, there were some questions, I can't remember, and I think this is this language is how we ironed out a lot of the issues that were an obstacle, because it's mostly just causing them to develop a policy. And
Yes.
implementing it. I know there's always question about implied versus guilty, or suspected versus guilty. I know we talked about that a long time, but I think this language is very carefully worded.
We did keep it within ESSA, and there was some discussion about the wording, but adapting and implementing policies, I think is a very reasonable request, as it was for the public school districts. And you were asking about immunity for public schools?
Yes, and there might not be, as I'm trying to think, certainly the teachers, whomever, would be covered by the school, the city would defend them, the county would defend them, and maybe someone here
Well,
knows.
Actually, I don't know that if I was a public school and had a policy against doing this and they violated the policy, I don't think they're obligated to defend them.
Well, this is not violating, this, Madam Chair, if I may, so this bill makes it illegal for someone, or not even whatever, so let's say there's a teacher in my school who I believe has molested one of my students.
Mm-hmm.
And that person goes to apply for another school, and that school inquires, hey, how was this guy? I'm not supposed to say, oh, he was the greatest teacher ever. I'm supposed to say he had sexual relations with one of my students, correct?
Right, or you could say, I have no comment, or you could say, we don't recommend people. You just can't say he was the teacher of the year.
Yeah. And that's their concern, because honestly, I want them to be able to say, I have strong suspicions it's this guy.
Oh, they can say that.
And they developed a policy, but then the question is, are they opening themselves up for liability? And that's what the private school's concern was, if their policy is to do that, under employment laws, HIPAA laws, whatever you wanna call them, confidentiality laws.
Well, I don't know about confidentiality between employment, but I would say that not adopting a policy prohibiting their employees from recommending people who are sexual predators is wrong, and that I would think the person who would violate a policy that was established by the school would be the one who was liable.
I understand.
Yeah, and Madam Chairman, I think it protects the school.
Yeah.
For having a policy.
If they have the policy, I was looking for more protection was the point. Is there any way that we can put in more protection for the school or the member who says, don't hire this guy, they're dangerous? That was my question. But anyway, this is a start.
You mean in the other direction?
In your direction.
Yeah.
I wanted stronger support, immunity in your direction, so that when somebody says, don't hire that guy, he can't get sued for saying, don't hire that guy. But they've got, I like the bill.
Sure, and maybe we can collaborate on a different bill for employment law for next year that'd be wider than just private schools.
In public schools, they're covered plenty.
But more than schools, that if you wanna divulge information about criminal activity.
She wants some immunity.
We want in on that, on Senator.
On my bill or Senator Pete's bill?
The proposed bill.
But Sorreville doesn't like immunity, so we're not gonna have more chat. But anyway, I move we pass the bill.
There a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
I thank the members of the subcommittee, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And we'll hear from Senator Edwards.
Madam Chair, members of the committee,
Montgomery County is requesting a little tweak to the language that simply says the school board, Board of Education, shall amend its regulation, have authority to amend its regulations to require persons seeking a technical professional license with an endorsement to teach military science have either the appropriate credentials issued by the United States military or a recommendation from a Virginia employing educational agency. Right now, they have about 200 students in a military science course in Montgomery County, and they work closely with Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets. But they have 3 instructors, but they want to hire another one, and they want to be able to, they are not tied into JRTC, and Junior ROTC, or the military, but they want to teach military science, and they believe they have to have the regulations changed so that the school board can request a military science endorsement like any other CTE program, but the regulation needs to be changed in order to allow them to have someone that can receive an endorsement from a Virginia employing educational agency. And again, they're not JRTC, but they do want to teach military science, and they're not tied into any military branch, but they are tied into Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets. They want to have a teacher and get that endorsement.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone that wishes to speak for or in opposition to the bill? All in favor? Aye. Thank you, Senator.
And off the record, we don't mention the other house. They've already passed the 22.
We don't care about
Don't tell me that, Senator.
Senator McPike, thank you. This is,
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this is Senate Bill 390, and I believe Senator Pillion has also a companion bill.
He has asked his bill to be rolled into House 847.
That's right. And I believe he has a slightly different enactment, which I also request that language be reflected in my bill as part of that motion to substitute.
is there a motion to accept?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this bill sets out to reduce the number of SOLs required by our school systems from 21 down to 17. This has been something that I've worked on for several years. Put the bill in originally in 2016, and I've since served on the SOL Innovation Committee. I think they've done a tremendous amount of work over the last couple of years to both in the Board of Education's 5 Seed program as well as verified performance assessments in order to more dynamically allow testing combinations. And I think that the recommendations of the board and the guidance that are listed in the statute are fairly solid. I think the Board of Education has done a tremendous amount of work, and this would give them the freedom to continue and I think complete the long road of the last several years, both on the Innovation Committee as well as the Board of Education's statewide public hearings I've participated in, and looking at their work, and I think they've got a great program. They're working on revising both the history sections and many others that I think are important updates. I think by completing this for reduction, this gives them the flexibility to give guidance in the future. Obviously, there's a fiscal savings as well, roughly $1.5 million as well. And so, Madam Chair, that is the bill.
Thank you. Is there anyone that wishes to?
Senator Pillion stepped in the room, not yet, but he was just outside the hall, if you also.
Oh, okay. Is there anyone that wishes to speak in favor?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Kathy Burke from the Virginia Education Association. This is actually a legislative priority that came directly off the floor of our convention. This past spring, we did ask Senator Pillion to carry this legislation on our behalf, and we're very grateful and excited to see Senator McPike also carry this legislation. We have seen efforts to reduce the SOL tests, keeping in mind the curriculum is what we teach. This is about how we test that curriculum that we teach. We had a lively debate on our convention floor about over-testing in the Commonwealth and the impact it has on student learning.
which seems so counterintuitive, but the testing culture we now have in Virginia has so overwhelmed our schools, our teachers, and our students that it really is impacting the ability to take those deep dives. If you aren't familiar with the efforts that the Board of Education and the Department of Education have been making in this lane of work, it is extraordinary. This board and the Department of Education have spent the last few years, since the first reduction in the SOL tests at the direction of the General Assembly, building extraordinary guidelines to ensure instruction and effective performance evaluation. It's interesting, in fact, that we'll hear shortly from Senator Pavola about school divisions of innovation. A school division of innovation is allowed to use performance assessments, particularly for our social studies and history tests. Virginia overtests our students. 23 states in the country have reduced, under the reauthorization of ESA, have reduced their testing to the federal standard. Again, the curriculum is what we teach, the tests are how we measure what we taught. And I think that the guidelines established by the Board of Education are effective and ensuring that all students across the Commonwealth are getting good instruction, and we urge you to support this legislation.
Is there anyone that wishes to speak in opposition?
Yes, ma'am. I'm Jim Dillard. I was a former member of this House. I was a member of the Education Committee, also a former member of the State Board of Education. And I'm here because I think this bill has a lot of unintended consequences. We're at a time in social studies that I speak for the Commission on Civic Education and the working group, not the official group. And I can tell you that social studies has been under attack. And in the elementary school particularly, it's been almost wiped out from the curriculum, even though it said it's there. But what would happen with this is that we would eliminate the test in Virginia studies on the 4th grade level. We do away with civics, which is so important at a time when we need more civic education. We would also wipe it out on Virginia and U.S. history. Now, they talked about all of these new assessments. Believe me, I can tell you that they are a long, long way from developing any kind of true assessment in social studies that would give us the statewide accountability that we need. And that's very, very important. And that's what's going to happen. So I realized that there were a whole lot of tests and a real feeling that, oh, the poor kids are being tested to death. And so we eliminated a lot of these tests. I would suggest that this bill goes too far. And at the very least, I would ask that you put an amendment in to at least save social studies. At this particular time in our history, we need all the social studies we can get. We need all the accountability for social studies that we can get. And this bill would eliminate that. And we are nowhere near, as I said before, the development of any kind of performance-based assessments in social studies. That's just the plain fact of the matter. And I urge you not to eliminate these tests with at least not seeing what is the alternative. At this point, we do not have it. So if somebody would move an amendment to eliminate social studies, I'd be happy, because it's a very, very important subject. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, thank you. Senator McPike, did you want to?
Yeah, Madam Chair, a couple things. There are still requirements as part of accreditation, as well as graduation requirements and guidance. A part of this bill, as you see, I think it's down in line 114. It still says that each school board shall enter a certified, it provided instructive administered alternative assessment consistent with the board guidelines. The board guidelines, as part of the 5C program the board has adopted, include that. It is, in fact, one of the core C's is civics and citizenship. And so the whole framework of the board that it adopted around this in the last several years is that core. And so it is already in the board guidelines. Furthermore, Madam Chair, I would say that having just had an 8th grader, now 9th grader, go through, I believe it was 5 SOLs within a single year in 8th grade, the pressure is absolutely ridiculous. It really is. You've got 5 tests back to back to back to back, and this is a completely different performance assessments and other integrated assessments can resolve these issues. Additionally, my kids came through the 4th grade civics, talking about the James River, the Roanoke. These all exist within the curriculum. They're taught today. That's not going to change. These are all a part of the fundamental guidelines that the Board of Education already has in place.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
I had a question. Actually, is Ms. Bircher still you may be the best person. So this is going from 21 to 17, is that correct? And then how many have? 29 to 17. 29 to 17. How many have we dropped in the last 5 years? Who knows that?
Emily Webb of the Department of Education. I believe back in 2014 when we originally passed the legislation, it was 34, and we reduced 5 down to 29. So this would eliminate the Virginia Studies, Civics and Economics, grade 8 writing, world history, Virginia and U.S. history, end of course writing, earth science, and chemistry. Because we are required to assess in each grade 3 through 8 in math and in reading, and then in each grade span in science. So those are the federal requirements.
Eliminate the tests.
Yes,
not the
it would
course
eliminate the
content of curriculum.
assessments.
So standardized tests.
Thank you.
Madam,
Yes.
it might be helpful for the committee to also hear that these elements are still required for the graduation requirements as you step through the program. Is that not true?
Yes, this would, we would potentially have to look at graduation requirements with the verified credit piece, because right now students use SOL assessments for verified credits, but there are alternative ways for students to earn verified credits through other board-approved assessments, and school divisions are moving to performance-based assessments as well, and the board has guidelines for those.
Yes, Senator.
I have had, and I don't know if there's anybody in the audience who can speak to this, but I have had some outreach from people who are concerned about how college preparation test scores in Virginia are falling since we've made some of those changes. Is there anybody that can speak to that?
I can tell you it's true.
Well, Madam Chairman, I would say this. This is always such a hard subject because we always hear a lot about SOLs, and I am so sorry that so much anxiety has been created over these tests. And I think it's because we missed the opportunity to redirect the focus of what was really important for the kids on how they were doing as opposed to how the schools were doing. But there's historical perspective here. I noticed that these guidelines from the federal government are from 1965. And we had enough challenges in Virginia in the early 1990s because while we have an obligation to make sure we have the right curriculum, and we want to make sure the kids get into the workforce, and we don't want them to be stressed about tests, we also have to be sure that we have a level playing field in Virginia. And that's why SOLs were constructed, because there was an incredible discordance between performance, even in any performance-based test you wanted to use, but including employment and completion of graduation requirements in Virginia, that we had to correct with a system in addition to the guidelines we'd gotten in 1965. And I mean, this is why I've reached out to try and work on the measurement tool for the individual child, so we could redirect our attention to that. But we've invested in competency-based learning and a test for civics or social studies or whatever you want, to the tune of a few $1 million over the past few years, and I don't see that test. And so we talk about competency-based tests, but they need to have a standardization and an availability so that we don't have a window of kids that are between not testing with SOLs and whatever the next thing is we're gonna be offering. So I remain anxious about this with the same intent that I want to make things better. I just don't think necessarily saying taking these away is solving the problem unless we have another way to make sure we have standardized benchmarks for Virginia.
I just wanted to address a few of the points that you made. I understand these concerns about not being able to evaluate how our students are performing and making sure that they are meeting grade level expectations. However, I don't think the standards of learning assessments have served us or our children well yes, the college test scores may be falling, but there's no correlation between SOLs and the kind of testing that we see on SATs or ACT. SOLs require memorization, but they don't support critical thinking and critical engagement. I think the critical point that is already made is that this change does not impact curriculum, it doesn't impact the content, it simply impacts the assessment. And I know, and educators know, that there is far better ways to assess student learning rather than having them sit through standardized tests that simply measure rote memorization. And I would think that we can work to develop better standards of assessment practices that are really going to lead them towards higher education, because there is a disconnect. When the students come into higher education and they test for those reading competencies, critical thinking competencies, they fall short. I've had parents reach out to me and say, my students did so well on SOLs. Why are they in remediation math? Why are they in remediation English, reading and writing? And that's because SOLs do not prepare or don't measure the level of preparation that students need to be at to achieve higher education competency. So I'm going to be supportive of this bill.
Madam Chairman, can I say one more thing?
Yes, sir.
Texting? You were saying that the SOL tests are just rote memory, and that is just not correct. We've made major changes. They were a long time ago. What's the name of Robert E. Lee's horse, for instance? But that has been long past. We now use graphs, charts, maps, and critical thinking. Of course, the Commission on Civic Education has helped write those, and we are strongly in support. In fact, when I was on the board, I helped promote these 5 Cs. And believe me, the tests now do involve critical thinking skills, and it's not just plain rote memory. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I I think this is where we talk over each other. SOLs are not designed to measure student growth. That's the whole point. They were never designed to measure student growth.
I agree with that, yeah.
They were measured to make sure there was parity of education in Virginia, and that's why they were set up and were put in. And the problem is they were somehow the only thing that ever got instituted, because we got so tangled up talking about them, and we got so preoccupied by them, that what they were never designed for was what the expectation was they were for. And so I think that we've got to be really careful in Virginia as we go forward that we address both issues. I agree. I want to see kids develop. We've already changed our entire high school experience. We're moving into middle school, critical thinking, community engagement. We've got, all of the profiles of a graduate. We've been on this. But that doesn't mean that that's exactly the same thing as what an SOL was designed to do. And when I hear what we're removing writing. We don't have writing down. We have a real challenge with young people and having competency for writing. And we've taken out almost every level of history in that. And so I'm not gonna be able to support this now, but I wanna make sure you understand that our intent is actually on the same page. But I am concerned that when we get wound up in a misinterpretation of what the test is for and therefore disavow it and send it on its way, we sometimes make the mistake of leaving a gap that we'll regret.
Are there any other comments from the floor?
Question for Senator McKnight.
Yes.
As you propose this, are there alternatives to what's being proposed?
So, Madam Chair, I think the Senator's question is in relation to what occurs. And I think that if you look at the body of the work, both in the SOL Innovation Committee, which I've been a part of the last 4 years, as well as the Board of Education's work, there are a number of different things that utilize integrated performance assessment, that utilize and combine the skill sets of the science, the history, and the writing, and combine assessments. So it becomes the holistic approach of the development of the student that is a part of the measurement, whether it be analytics, integration of writing, whether it be the civics integration of the writing, and so it's starting to combine what is in these into this performance assessment, or locally administered performance assessments. And that's a part of the guidelines that they have to certify as a part of this that's in this legislation.
So, Madam Chair, it's not just a matter of we're just throwing out SOLs and that's it.
Madam Chair, follow up. do we have those performance evaluations developed? Cause that's, I misspoke earlier when I said competency-based, that's higher ed. The performance evaluations, we've been investing in them, but we, as of the last I heard, we do not have those tested or standardized across the state yet. Is that accurate?
I can't speak to the locally administered performance assessment. There may be someone from the VOE that might be able to speak to it, or Holly, speak to it more accurately. I know the board has worked extensively the last couple of years getting there.
We do not have any statewide performance assessments. The board has updated just about annually the guidelines for performance-based assessments. We have developed some rubrics and criterion tools to assist local school divisions, but at this time there are no statewide performance assessments.
Kathy?
Chair, members of the committee, local school divisions are implementing the guidelines by the Board of Education. That's the reason they were developed. So as to ensure that anything that was developed at the local level to kind of smooth out everything Senator Donovan described. So it was the establishment of rubrics, like all of these components must be in your locally designed assessments. Very specific guidelines. School divisions starting this year must have performance-based assessment plans for any assessment that they give for any of the coursework for which there was an SOL that the General Assembly removed in the last few years. And so there is a shift to local assessments developed in very, very strict guidelines. A great example for the writing, we heard this from our Southwest folks a few years ago. The writing prompt included for a fifth grader, they asked them to talk about your riding in public transportation. And our members came to us and said, that's just not, and this was before Uber, and I'm not sure kids even know Uber is, maybe, I don't know if there's public, but anyway, their students weren't familiar with public transportation. And teachers are so limited in what they can say and do, the teacher couldn't describe for the child what that meant. And so when we look at these locally developed assessments, we can use language and concepts that are most impactful for different areas of the state and will be most effective for the students in those school divisions. So the guidelines are very, very strict and very strong.
Is there any further discussion? Is there a motion on the floor? Second, all in favor? Aye.
No and no.
3 ayes, 2 noes. Thank you, Senator. Senator Favola, I do apologize. You had come in first. And then you, I did not see you.
I have 2 bills before you. One was carried over from your last meeting, that's Senate Bill 933. And actually the committee guidance would be very helpful. What we did is myself, some activists from Fairfax County, not activists, sorry, Mike Malloy, who's actually I was very active, very active, and Emily Webb and others sat down and we made progress. There is an amendment in the nature of a substitute, so I go to
Second, all in favor? Aye. If you'll speak to the substitute.
Yeah, so what we did is we just removed the last 2 paragraphs that we had earlier, which it essentially asked the Board of Education to allow a category of individuals who tend to drop out with fewer than 4 semesters left of school. 4 semesters in high school, the students that come to us who are not proficient in their native language, not proficient in English, and they do tend to drop out. We had asked that they not be counted in the overall accreditation process. So that was a sticking point for the Department of Ed. Our compromise is that the Board of Ed will do an evaluation to determine best practices on how school systems can best serve these students. And at the end of that evaluation, they will make revisions to the methodology for the school accreditation ratings in time for the 2021-2022 school year. And we're very satisfied with that.
Is the Department of Education satisfied too at this point?
Yes, we thank Senator Favola for working, with us on this. I think this will allow us to, get the definition correct, look at the data that we receive from local school divisions, and then allow us to make any changes necessary, as we move forward.
Thank you. Anyone wishes to speak in favor?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Michael at Fairfax County Schools, I sincerely appreciate the work that the patron has done, the work that we've done with the Department of Education, the Board of Education, and the Secretary. Just by way of full disclosure, this compromise that they were talking about still leaves kind of an unanswered question in terms of short-term impacts on our schools. We look forward to this moving forward, and it should be a committee, subcommittee as well to move this forward. We'll continue to discuss with the department, with the two parties.
The school system's not perfectly happy, but this is the right thing to do.
Ron Jordan, Loudoun County Public Schools. This is an issue of great interest to our school board. We're very supportive of the senator's efforts on this.
Thank you.
Lila Wise, representing Arlington and Alexandria schools. We are very supportive and thank Senator Favola for doing this for us.
Thank you. Is there anyone that wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any questions from the committee?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Senator Favola, so this bill, the substitute that I have here is gonna allow the study and reporting. And then it will be used 2021, 2022 to see what they're gonna do about the accreditation rating. Is that?
Well, I think in
Somebody else.
2021, 2022 is when the next sort of accreditation report is due. So the intent is to have this evaluation done in time for the next accreditation report. But to refer to the experts.
You can talk about Fairfax, I'll talk about Fairfax.
Madam Chair, Senator Peake, what this does is our current accreditation ratings would stay in place. For the next accreditation year, which would be the 2021 school year, the system that's in place now would continue. So the schools that we discussed last week a little bit would continue where they are. By the 21-22 school year, the department will have completed their study and made any necessary changes that they discovered in terms of how those accreditation ratings are calculated. So from 21-22 going forward, the accreditation will be calculated using a new methodology.
All right, Madam Chair, if I may, if we were to talk in just normal terms.
I can speak in normal terms.
It seems to me that the purpose of this is y'all in your division have a fair number of, and I think this came up last time, probably immigrant students or students, English as a second language.
Right.
They're being tested and counted in your school ratings and they're hurting your accreditation. And so you wanna kinda take them out so it won't hurt your accreditation.
So that's not what we're doing here.
But that's not
what I wanna make sure.
No, Madam Chairman and Senator Peake, that may have been, that was the earlier
That was
version that you
last
saw.
week's version.
Right, so this
Okay.
is the revised version.
Let's
So,
figure out how it's
yeah,
revised.
right. So
I
the
can't
student-
remember last week.
I know. The students will still be counted until the evaluation is completed and there's new scoring procedures. So, that's why Fairfax County Schools is only 70% happy with this and not 100% happy.
And then, Madam Chair,
Yes.
so will there be a bill next year, or will?
No.
So there will not be a bill, but then y'all will use whatever you do in this study to help your accreditation ratings out?
So this would allow the board to get more information and to review our current methodologies as it relates to the dropout rate, and then make any changes. This is an evolving student population, that we are not comfortable just removing from any kind of calculations, but there are lots of different programs, completer programs that students could do to not be counted against the dropout rate. So this will allow us to get more information and then allow the state board to make any necessary changes. They are starting this process, but we are not there yet. Currently, a number of Fairfax schools are on a 3-year waiver for accreditation, so this will allow us time before they have that next accreditation cycle.
Madam Chair, Senator Peake, if I may, this is not about academic achievement. This is specifically about how dropout rates are calculated and how graduation and completion rates are Just a reminder from last week, the student population we're talking about is we've seen a significant influx of students that are coming to our jurisdiction. They're 16, 17, 18 years of age. They're coming from they may be refugees from other countries. They may have very low English language skills, but they also may not have spent very much time in formal schooling ever. So they're coming to us with very low literacy skills in their own native language, in addition to not having a lot of proficiency in English. So it's creating a kind of a little bit of a mismatch in terms of how the state measures things like dropouts. This is a very non-traditional population that really wasn't envisioned by the formulas as they exist now.
Yes.
I just wanna say, data specificity is really, really important. We have to ask the right questions in order to solve problems. And this is something we haven't thought about before, and when we lump it in with non-specific data as dropouts, it really makes it hard for us to solve the problem. And it also, there's an injustice in the schools having that count as them not retaining a child to graduation as if they were there from kindergarten. And so I think this is a good step in the right direction for us to figure this out. And I would like to support it. And on that note, I'll move to the report.
All in favor? Aye. Five ayes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time with this. Your committee was very helpful. Now I have Senate Bill 249. There's an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Is there a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
My understanding is these were technical amendments offered by the Department of Education, but the real content of my bill has not changed. So I'm gonna just go ahead and speak to my bill, and I will ask General Counsel to confirm my understanding. Okay. So what this is this would permit school systems to apply to be a school division of innovation. And under that designation, they could go forward with local assessments rather than the standard SOL assessments. But there would be a process. The school system would be required to fill out an application that demonstrated they could implement performance-based assessments. They would have to be able to evaluate those assessments. They would have to bring in an objective third party. And at the end of the day, the purpose of this bill is to allow some creativity on the part of school systems in coming up with new performance-based measurements. Now, I want to be right up front about it. As part of this waiver, part of this application process, school systems could ask to replace the Virginia Studies and the Civics and Economic Standards of Learning as part of their their local performance-based assessments. I was asked to carry this on behalf of the Loudoun County Public School System. It is a high-performing public school system. They do a lot of project-based learning. They have, relatively speaking, they have high passage rates on their standardized tests. This is something that's important to the superintendent. They want to try some creative performance-based assessments in their school system.
Senator Volo, what's different from what you're doing and what
Senator McPike was doing? I heard most of what Senator McPike offered. I'm not 100% sure, but this could be available to any school within a school system. There's an application required. It would have to be approved by the Department of Education. I wasn't completely certain about what Mr. McPike's track. I think he just removed SOLs. Mine is they're gonna essentially ask for a waiver, but they can only get that waiver if in fact they can demonstrate a locally based process that is performance based. So it's like a quid pro quo. kind of, if you let me go,
Like that one.
you let me go without the SOLs. You let
Now
me-
you've gone and
No,
done it.
I was wondering if you were all awake, but if they can't do the SOLs, the state mandates, they have to come up with something equally as rigorous, but locally based. So I'm glad I entertained you for a moment.
So, a couple of things. One is, in the time that I've spent in some of the education meetings over the last 4 years, it's clear that there are areas of excellence in Virginia that are beginning to develop performance-based measures. Haven't been tested very much, and they're not shared. And so there's not an attempt to standardize how we're doing performance-based testing with the best models we have. So when we have these meetings, you'll have superintendents from different areas and different school districts in Virginia saying, oh my gosh, you're doing that, that's amazing, I wish I had that. If we create a silo out of every school division that doesn't follow, we already are siloed, and it should be that way, that's how the Constitution is, that school divisions do their own thing to a certain extent, but within a construct of the standards that are developed by the DOE. And so when you start abandoning civics or the actual standards of learning, which is is that not what we're talking about? You're only talking about the test?
The test only.
Okay, and so why isn't this a pilot program? If we're trying to cut our teeth on how to do performance-based testing and reproduce it in the school divisions around Virginia, why don't we have pilot programs like we do on 365-day school, or some of the other things that we're doing, so we can test it and see if we can reproduce it?
Well, in effect, the Department of Education could turn this into a pilot, Madam Chair, Senator Donovan, because the Department of Ed would have to issue the approval. So if the Department of Ed wanted to see something
But we've written it for
implemented
the whole,
first.
that any school can apply.
Right, but they have to get the approval from the Department of Ed.
So, go ahead.
Let me go first. Okay, let me kind of succinctly summarize the whole thing. It's fairly simple, actually. School divisions of innovation were created several years ago. They were intended to be test beds, like you said, for piloting different learning techniques and teaching techniques. That already exists. This bill simply allows school divisions of innovation, using specified criteria, to apply to the State Board of Education to use a performance-based assessment in lieu of an SOL test for 4th and 8th grade Virginia studies and civics and economics. The statute said, the bill lays out the criteria that the application must have. More importantly, the State Board does not have the statutory authority to allow them to use a performance-based assessment in lieu of the SOL test, so it grants them the authority. to do
Madam
that.
Chairman, just a follow-up. So Senator Locke just asked, basically, if Senator McPike's bill passes, those SOLs don't exist.
Exactly, and again, that's an if it passes, and, we would prefer that this bill doesn't go as far as Senator McPike's bill does. This bill simply allows the, school division of innovation to make application to the state board to use a performance-based assessment in lieu of the test. It doesn't get rid of the SOL, it just allows them to use the performance-based assessment, which you all know is a demonstration of learning competence rather than a multiple choice test. That's essentially, and allows the state board to review the application, they can decide whether they want to grant it or not. And the intent is, in the SODIs was to test these concepts, if they're successful, then roll them out to other divisions statewide.
And Madam Chairman, I would just be so much more comfortable if the bill said that. And that if you said it was a pilot program and that you were gonna measure it and you were gonna put it through rigorous academic.
That's in the criteria in the bill.
Okay.
So, Senator Donovan, I would say that, when the original School Divisions of Innovation, legislation passed, and I cannot remember the year off the top of my head, a couple years ago, it really directed the board to develop these regulations. So those regulations actually just came into effect in October, and so this really is setting up a pilot program, because while any school division can apply, it doesn't have to be the entire school division, it could be a single school
demonstrate it measures the child's achievement. If it's a new test that's developed, what's your reference gonna be? How are you gonna measure that the tests work?
Those all have to be in the application to the state board. The local division at the time has to provide all that information in its application to the state board, and the state board evaluates the application to determine whether those types of things are met.
And I would just add, Madam Chair and Senator Donovan, I mean, we do have that the articulation of this plan, this performance-based plan that the school system must submit as part of their application, has to have a third party, the provision for a third party scoring of each performance assessment, which will add some element of objectivity, and they have to combine it with some quantitative tests that are, valid and reliable, as well as qualitative. So you're not just going to get applications that are all touchy-feely. There will be, the applications will have to, as I read it, will have to have both, some quantitative and qualitative.
Madam Chairman, if the Department of Education already has the guidelines for SDIs, and you've just promulgated the regs, what does this bill do that is not already accomplished in McPike's bill or in that regulatory process?
One, it doesn't give the State Board of Education the authority to waive the SOL test and allow a performance-based assessment. That's the critical piece on this.
They don't feel they have the statutory authority to do that. Otherwise, they've got they've got the regulatory framework.
So I'm gonna point out, we just took away 12 SOLs without any framework to develop performance-based metrics.
And this is a framework, this is actually a more structured
Right.
approach.
We're not eliminating the SOLs, we're eliminating only testing, and it's not replacing the test, the multiple choice test, with a performance-based assessment where the student has to demonstrate critical thinking.
Should do that for 2 or 3 years before we remove the SOLs.
That wasn't a question.
Well, I would just say, Madam Chair, my final plea is, again, the intent of this bill is that the students meet the expected academic achievement markers of the SOLs. It's just that they be evaluated in a different way, and the school systems would be held to performance-based standards. So the school systems don't wanna walk away from accountability. They're just asking for the opportunity to demonstrate accountability and academic success in a different way.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
And Senator Favola, I just say, I don't have any strong opinions against it, but I do have a particular colleague who, whenever he sees civics coming out of anything, and I'm not gonna mention any names, but I wanna run this by the senator from Bedford before I vote yes on this, so I will be a no, and somebody move to advance it.
Is there a motion?
My only thing is, I don't see the difference between this and what Pike's bill did.
My brief understanding, and you would know better, you were here for the whole conversation. My brief understanding of what I heard from Senator McPike is he was just eliminating it, and there was no expectation on the part of the school system to demonstrate an evaluation of that competency. Certainly the school systems were gonna continue to teach that subject matter, but I didn't hear the expectation that there was going to be another kind of an assessment. Now, maybe I'm wrong, because I remember.
I believe you're correct that there was a reduction in numbers of the SOLs that were going to be expected of the school divisions. This bill, should Senator McPike's bill pass, this bill may not be necessary because the 2 of the assessments that he was identifying concerned the Virginia test and the civic engagement test, so it may not be necessary.
I guess my strategy would be to keep both bills in play, because I don't know which one's gonna pass.
Madam Chairman, does the Department of Education have a process in place to test performance-based measures of kids so that we have a good process that we are putting in place to test our kids in a different way? Or is this the only vehicle? Department of Education to in any way hold accountable the quality of the performance-based measures that will be traded out? Do you need a vehicle, or do you have power within the regulations you already have? Does this need to be, we need to have performance-based pilots across the state in all subjects, and you need to be testing them?
We, as SDI is written now, we are not able to, we are only allowed to waive regulation, not state code. And the Virginia Studies in Civics and Economics assessment, as well as assessments, are in code. So this would allow us to be able to do this now, only in these two subject areas.
And do you have any power to centralize equality of performance-based testing for all of the different things you're gonna want performance-based testings, or are we leaving that just to the arbitrary sophistication of each school district?
So the application would, and the assessment that would go along with it, is where we would evaluate that local performance-based assessment to see if it continued to meet Virginia's high standards and the rigor that's currently in our SOL assessments.
Redirection, an additional question. So what I'm really asking is, let's say McPike's bill passes, and we don't have those SOLs. Does the Department of Education have a plan to develop high-quality, performance-based measures that are not solely reliable on each individual district developing their own?
We are working on that, and I'd be happy to provide you more information.
Move to report.
We have a motion to report, second. All in favor?
Aye.
One no, one abstention, and 3 ayes.
I thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I saw Senator Pillion here. Is he still here?
I am still here.
Thank you.
I am still here. Madam Chair.
Welcome.
1087, I think my other one was rolled into consider McPike.
It was, yes. Thank you.
So as you're all aware, maybe you've read the recent op-ed in the RTD that Jay Jones and I published about school construction and
I'm sorry, Senator, I
Yes.
can't hear you.
Okay. No problem. I'm here. Members of the committee, you may, as you're all aware, we have a school construction problem in the Commonwealth. Delegate Jay Jones and I co-authored an op-ed that ran the RTD expressing that this is something that doesn't just affect rural Southwest Virginia, this is also in his district as well and throughout the entire Commonwealth, inner city, urban, rural, throughout. So what this bill does, I'll provide a few facts. 50% of Virginia schools were built over 50 years ago, and 28% were built before World War II. And we know that in many localities, these percentages are much, much higher. This bill does two things. It establishes the School Construction Fund as a special non-recurring fund, and it also requires the Department of Ed to establish the School Construction Program to provide grants to school boards that leverage federal, state, and local programs and resources to finance the design and construction of new schools or the modernization and maintenance of existing schools. Before the 2008 recession, we used this same school construction grant fund that this bill would reinstate, and it provided dedicated state support to localities seeking additional resources for construction. Last year it was available. Bristol, which is in my Senate district, received $400,000 for school construction. Since 2015, that state funding has dried up. What this fund would do is reopen that and provide us with a pathway to get not only state funds, but also federal, local, private, and leverage anything we can to get our schools back to the level that we want our children to be attending. There are some people that are here that have driven a distance to support this bill. If it's a pleasure to share, I would appreciate them to be able to speak.
We'll open the floor for anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the bill.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Ryan O'Toole, representing the Coalition of Small and Rural Schools of Virginia. We first want to thank Senator Pillion for his work on this legislation. As he mentioned, the member localities within our coalition, their localities are simply not equipped right now to be able on their own to pull together the financing mechanisms they need to either renovate schools, build new schools. Theoretically, the literary fund is set up to support divisions that have certain needs in terms of capital construction, renovation, those sorts of things. But for a variety of factors, mostly with the financial mechanism by which a lot of literary funds are dispersed, localities are not using it. Those localities that have been on the priority waiting list for literary fund dollars simply are just not getting enough from the state currently for them to be able to finance their projects. Localities are doing everything they can to figure out how to maximize, again, as Senator Saline mentioned, private dollars, other loan mechanisms, but there's simply just not a mechanism that the state is providing right now to assist those localities that have fewer financial means and on their own cannot figure out a way to construct any new schools or facilities. This bill is incredibly critical for these divisions to be able to have a tool, a mechanism, a grant program we think is the best way to actually provide funding for these localities to be able, based on their need, to start addressing the massive crisis of school construction. So we thank you for your consideration and hope you support the bill.
Thank you.
My name is John Koontz. I'm the Board of Supervisors, Middlesex County. I'm one of these rural counties that doesn't have the funds to do this by ourselves. What we would like to see, and thank you, Senator Pillion, for your patronage. Thank you, Senators, for considering 1087. What we'd really like to see is our capital improvement plan that goes out 10 years and shows an $8 million high school renovation or a $2 million HVAC replacement at our elementary school. We don't want to keep kicking those out 1 year at a time because there's no funding since 2009 that's accessible to us. What this solves is it brings the state back into the game with these monies. It allows localities with limited tax bases that reserve money for these projects to actually get them up and running. We've talked with the contractors. We've been innovative in how we put money to the side. In Middlesex, for instance, we put up solar arrays in all of our schools so that we can reduce our OpEx. But in terms of the capital improvements, we just need the state money. And right now it's not being used in its current construct. Senator Pillion's done something here that I think solves our problem and gets our schools, it stops the crumbling. The reason I'm here, our superintendent found out that this failed in the House subcommittee. He called me and said, I've got a family emergency, can you go? This is the one, this is the important one for our superintendents and for our school system. I reached out to another superintendent out in Bristol. He said, yep, this is the one, this is the one. Okay, so if you would please take this very seriously, this is how we can actually make a difference at the local level with the support from you at the state level, and thank you again for considering this.
Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, first off, on the timeline, we are supportive of this legislation and other efforts for the state to increase investment in school facilities. The state had a grant program prior to 2009 that had $27.5 million a year annually allocated to it. That has not been funded since 2009. This is an opportunity to improve the state investment.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm Tiffany Kathy Birch with the Virginia Education Association. We spend a lot of time educating our members that the state in general has not played a very, very big role in construction and capital projects. I think Senator Donovan in a previous subcommittee meeting reminded folks of that. This is one place where the General Assembly and Virginia did, and this grant, as you just heard, has been funded since 2008. I also was just next door in another committee, and it's in K-12. Sometimes we have to look at creative solutions. Clearly, there's a fiscal impact here. We're trying to put money back in this fund, but we are looking at a creative solution to a very big problem in a place where the state has generally not played very big, but we need them to start looking at this kind of funding again, and we support the bill.
Thank you. Is there anyone that wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any questions from committee? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator McClellan. And just a quick note, if anyone is here for SB 551, patroned by Senator Ruff, that bill has, the patron has moved to strike it. Senator McClellan. Whichever one you would like to do first.
Let's start with, Senate Bill 729. This bill returns discretion to, school principals on whether to report certain misdemeanor offenses to law enforcement. This used to be the law. Then, back in the tough on crime wave, of legislation across the country, it was made mandatory.
And what we have seen, what we have heard from our principals, from a number of people, is they really prefer to have that discretion, because oftentimes, they are better able to determine if a particular behavior or a particular incident is serious enough that it needs to be referred to law enforcement. You know, is this a first time offense? Is this a minor offense? Is this something that should be what introduces that student to the criminal justice system? Virginia, unfortunately, leads the nation in referrals of students to law enforcement. And what we are hearing from all of our education professionals, whether it's principals, whether it's school boards, whether it's superintendents, is part of that is because we took away their discretion to determine what can they handle through the discipline process and what needs to be handled through the criminal justice process. And these are low-level misdemeanor behaviors. And I have Amy Willard from the Legal Aid Justice Center who can answer any questions about sort of the specific incidents or the specific offenses, if you have any.
Madam Chair, committee members, Amy Willard, Legal Aid Justice Center. We're very much in support of this. We have to stop this flow of kids into court from schools. We have to start creating ways for students to be able to make mistakes and recover from those mistakes and not have these court consequences hanging over their head or even the threat of court consequences. You know, school officials can make these decisions. A lot of these decisions are common sense. I promise you that kids are being disciplined for these incidents as well, in ways that I might not even like. So that it's not like there's no accountability for what's going on in the schools. You know, if Ms. Haney were here, she's mentioned, you know, she said this in another meeting over in the House. At every stage of the court process, folks are given discretion. Law enforcement has discretion, prosecutors have discretion, intake officers have discretion. We don't give that same discretion to schools, and we just need to restore that to where it belongs there. I realize we have a new General Assembly this session, but I would just say, you know, this exact legislation has passed the Senate body for multiple years with multiple patrons from both sides of the aisle. So I would just urge you to support it this year as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Madam Chair, Danielle Midland, high school principals. As you just heard, we do appreciate the flexibility. We are trained principals and assistant principals are trained to handle these types of cases. If we want to look at them on an individual basis, rather than being forced to automatically send them to law enforcement, we believe that creates injustice and things. Thank you very much, Senator, for bringing the bill.
Thank you.
Chair, members of the committee, Kathy Birch with the Virginia Education Association, we strongly support this legislation. And again, there is discretion everywhere except for with the principal. And again, when the principals are standing up here saying, please give us this discretion, it's important to support the bill.
Good afternoon, J.T. Kessler on behalf of the Virginia School Boards Association. I'm just gonna echo the comments that were made and say we support the bill.
Thank you. Anyone that wishes to speak in opposition? All in favor? Aye. I'll be five.
All right.
Speak and aye?
I guess we can abstain, just in case of
All right, Senate Bill 728 would fully implement the Board of Education's recommended SOQs. And I know this will have to go to finance if it reports, but this is where the policy decisions are made. And Virginia, 150 years ago, this year, established a public education system of high quality. Over time, every constitution we've had has maintained that. We have delegated to the Board of Education to determine what is needed to provide the high quality education that is promised to our students in the Constitution. And they spend a lot of time talking to a lot of experts to determine what those standards should be. This is their recommendation, and we as the body who is charged with striving to achieve the high quality education in the Constitution really should make the public policy determination of whether we want to do that or not, whether we trust the officials that we put in place to make these determinations or not. And I think there's several people here to speak in favor of the bill.
Before we go, if, I know several of these, proposals also echo the governor's plan for education, such as, lowering the ratio of ELL students to teachers, increasing the, number of school counselors. Are there any other elements of this bill that also are already funded basically in the governor's proposal?
So I'm going to have to phone a friend on that one.
Hi, Chris Duncan with the Commonwealth Institute. So the governor also included a pretty substantial increase to the at-risk add-on program of $140 million over the biennium. That would contribute to some of the investment that the board included in their equity fund that they created. It's structured somewhat similarly, but it would offset some of the costs that the board had initially projected to create that equity fund.
Okay, thank you. Anyone that wishes to speak in favor of the bill?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Kathy Berkshire with the Virginia Education Association. We strongly support every one of the SOQ revisions issued by the Board of Education. In fact, we wish the student specialized support included a requirement that it be a registered nurse, because we know that oftentimes our students are getting their health care at school. However, we recognize the need to step back a little bit from that, but still to put those pieces there. Again, I appreciate Senator McClellan being really clear about the policy decisions here. The board was so thoughtful in the study of the data, the prevailing practice, and then really looking at our student populations and not just basing these recommendations on what's currently happening on the ground, but what we know our students need. And that is incredibly important in order to maintain the system of high quality public education across the Commonwealth, and we fully support this legislation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. My name is Melandra Coleman, and I'm a teacher at John Marshall High School in Richmond Public Schools. I am here today in support of SB 728 for my students. Each and every student has a right to a high quality education. And here in Richmond, we're working around the clock to make this a reality. But what I see on a daily basis are barriers that keep us from fulfilling the promise that we as a Commonwealth have made to our students. What I see are under-resourced schools in our highest need communities. And what is a resource of which we are in great need in Richmond Public Schools? I'm so glad that you asked. We are in desperate need, especially at the high school level, an area which is often ignored, of reading specialists and reading curricula. Many of our high school students, at least at my school, are 2 or 3 years below grade level in reading. And that impacts classroom behavior, high stakes testing, ability to succeed in all classes, future employment, and the list goes on. So I'm here today to cry out for human and academic resources that will level the literacy playing field and the future success of our students. Additionally, did you know that statewide, the highest poverty schools spend less per student than our lowest poverty schools? This is backwards. Morally, it's backwards. Financially, it's backwards. Studies show that increased spending has much more pronounced benefits for students from low-income families in terms of improving outcomes. The legislation before you sees the inequity of our current funding model and creates an equity fund that begins to modernize our education funding formula by recognizing that each student is not the same and that funding should reflect student needs. I urge the committee to consider the needs of our students living in poverty and to have the courage to go beyond the governor's budget and support SB 728 today. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Pauline Sewers with the Virginia Academy of School Psychologists and the Virginia State Reading Association. The stars are aligning. I was right behind the person speaking about reading. I won't go through all of that again, but I would like to say that the reading specialist and the school psychologist are both positions recommended in the SOQ bill that provide direct hands-on services to students. There are many things in the bill that are very much needed. I guess my old teacher's hat says we we must give the direct services to students first. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Meg Clark, and I'm a parent of a Chesterfield County student. And I'm here to tell you a really quick story that a friend of mine shared with me the other day. She has a son who is on the spectrum. He struggles with anxiety, with depression, and with feelings of low self-worth. He was on the way home one day on the bus, and he spoke about attempted suicide, about thinking about killing himself, and the student next to him heard him. She went and reported it to her parents, who then went and called the school, reported it to the school administration. However, the school administration never reported it to this child's parents. Parents heard about it the next day. They went in and spoke to the administration, and they asked the administration, what is the policy? What's protocol here? And the administration said, well, it kind of depends on the day. So I ask you, we have to ask, what does that mean, it depends on the day? Because our teachers and our administrators, they're trained to watch for kids in trouble, kids that are at risk. But what happens when our schools are understaffed? A guidance counselor is only available every other day, or a nurse is only in the school once a week. What happens when we have a classroom that is too large and the teacher doesn't have the support staff that she needs? There are dozens and dozens of stories about kids like Roberts that are illustrating the challenges that Virginia has presented when we inadequately fund our schools. This was a system failure not based on protocol, but based on a lack of funds. And if we continue to underfund our schools, we'll be faced with catastrophic consequences, which I fear that we will fail to recover. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
I'm Sherry Detman with Middle High School principals. These are our standards of quality, and the General Assembly has long recognized that your Board of Education is tasked with looking into this and making recommendations. In the past, they've been accepted but not even funded. For years and years, localities have recognized that we need more assistant principals, not what the standards of quality require, but what school divisions require. So localities pick up the tab. So thank you very much for the bill. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ann Forrester. I'm a middle school English as a second language teacher in Richmond Public Schools. I'm here today in support of this bill and what it would mean for my students. When I think about what the passage of this would mean is that English language learners are finally a priority in the Commonwealth. When I sat down to write what I was going to say for you today, I tried to think of one single story or one student that just kind of encapsulates the situation I see in my classroom every day. And the truth is, there are just too many to tell. I would be here forever. So there's the 6th grader who'd never been to school before he started last year. There's the 7th grader whose uncle is his primary caregiver, and that's his only relative in the entire country. And that uncle is fighting to keep them together. There's a 6th grader that desperately needs counseling, and I don't really feel like he's getting what he needs because of overworked counselors, psychologists, support staff. There's a 6th grader that does all of her work to perfection, and she does it quietly in a chaotic classroom, and she doesn't get what she needs in a class of 32 students. It's not fair. So, these students are going to continue to enter our classrooms. They're going to continue to enter mine. They're going to continue to enter classrooms all around Virginia, and it's kind of up to us whether or not we are prepared to handle them. They come into our classrooms and our country through no choice of their own, and we really are not setting schools up to be successful with them, and we're not setting kids up to be successful either. So, high quality, nice instruction, and social and emotional support services are what research shows these kids need to be successful. So, other states like Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee definitely do a better job staffing these positions, and I urge this committee to really consider what these kids need and have the courage to go beyond the governor's budget and support SB 758.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, my name is Kenneth Gilliam, and I'm the Policy Director for New Virginia Majority. We are a statewide civic engagement and policy advocacy organization, and we are firmly committed to making sure that we can advance policies here in Virginia that will improve the lives of working class people, people of color, and other minoritized communities throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we want to make sure that every child in our state, whether they live in Petersburg, Virginia, or Chesterfield County, on the Eastern Shore or the Southwest part, where they have access to the resources they need in the classroom to succeed. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we fully fund the cost of education here in our state. We know that since the recession, The state has not fully funded public education at the level it had before the recession when you adjust for inflation. And we know that that directly impacts low-income schools that serve low-income students the most. And we know that over 80% of Virginia's public schools that serve low-income students also significantly serve a high percentage number of students of color. So not only is it an opportunity to make sure that every child in this state has access to the resources that they need, but also provides an opportunity for us to advance racial equity in this state to make sure that children of color also have access to the resources they need. For those reasons, we strongly support this bill.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chairman. This is Subcommittee Chris Suncombe with Commonwealth Institute, strong support for the legislation. I want to add a note for our support for the Equity Fund. One of the reasons we heard the statistic about us spending less per student in our highest poverty divisions and our lowest poverty divisions, part of the driving force for that is our current standards of quality, which accounts for about 85% of our direct aid spending, does not take into account students' socioeconomic status. This legislation would change that, and Virginia would join the 24 states that do. And I think that's an important step to having a fair and equitable finance system here in the state.
Thank you.
Hi, Madam Chair, Rachel Dean, the Legal Aid Justice Center. We want to echo the sentiments previously stated about the importance of the SOQs, particularly for low-income children and their families, and for low-wealth school divisions. And I also want to emphasize that this is something that is enshrined in our Constitution, and it's a legal and moral obligation of the Assembly. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone that wishes to speak in opposition? Any?
Your report.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Morrissey, thank you. Good afternoon.
Yes, please. Evening.
A few more hours, what big is it? I'm here with Senate Bill 1080. And let me tell you the gist of what this bill is. It's to establish an urban teacher funding program which will be administered by the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and for the purpose of providing grants to persons who are employed in urban school jurisdictions where there are teacher shortages for tuition relief. Let me take a step back and give you the genesis of that. In some urban jurisdictions, particularly my Senate district, Richmond, Petersburg in particular, Hopewell, we have a real shortage of teachers, and this is what occurs. Petersburg is a wonderful example. Every year they will hire 60 new teachers who will matriculate from some of our universities like Virginia State University. They will train them, they will provide mentoring, they will be there for a year, and then after that, they will leave to a contiguous jurisdiction like Chesterfield, where they'll pay them more. And then what happens? Petersburg starts all over again. We want to incentivize teachers to stay in these urban jurisdictions. And how do we incentivize them? We will give them assistance for their college tuition. So that's the gist of it. The teachers would be required to stay in that urban jurisdiction for 5 years. Here is the benefit. Those schools will do better if we have teachers that have a commitment to the school and it grows from year to year. A school that has every year a brand new cadre of teachers that are just starting, right, will struggle more than that elementary or middle school that have teachers that have 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years experience. And it is just human nature for those teachers that get hired to be looking around, and they are just swept away by the neighboring jurisdictions who want to hire them. And then we start all over again. So that's the gist of it, and I will You know, I can get further into the weeds if you want to, but maybe I'll pause for a moment and maybe there's some folks that want to speak to it, or I'll answer any questions that the chair or committee members have.
Are there any individuals who want to speak in favor of the bill?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Kathy Berkshire with the Virginia Education Association. The VEA supports any efforts to address the true shortage that we have of attracting and retaining teachers, particularly in our hardest to staff school divisions. We appreciate the Senator's approach. We need to look at compensation overall, and quite, just not to go back to that last bill too, we have a systemic problem in Virginia with funding teacher salaries at a way that will encourage them to stay, but also having supports in place. Part of the SOQs and the equity fund, by the way, would be allowable to be used to help support some of these salary increases. But of course, this would be another opportunity that school divisions would have available. And so we encourage you to look at any way possible to make sure that you're attracting and then retaining high quality teachers in all of our school divisions. And this 5-year approach is, again, we look at creative ways to ensure we are solving this problem, or at least addressing it in meaningful ways. This is one of them.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
What the speaker just said, multiply it by 10 for those schools in an urban jurisdiction.
Yes.
I think that one of the good things about this is that you've made it a private-public fund, because with that let's say Petersburg businesses really wanted to emphasize Petersburg, would it go straight to the treasury? Can they earmark it for Petersburg?
I don't know about that, but if you look at section A, of course, the money, there could be all types of gifts, donation, grants, bequests, that goes into the state treasury, but that is, whether it can remain, if you can dedicate it to a particular school, I'm not sure. And that wasn't addressed in the bill, but.
I think that is a good recommendation.
Something to think about, because there might be, businesses get that education creates their workforce pipeline. And so, it's reasonable that we could get them to sometimes help, but it would be nice if they could direct, I don't know if it can be done, but it's just a thought.
And these are for tuition-related higher education loans that those students have received. By analogy, when we had a shortage in the Commonwealth of doctors in some rural areas, and dentists, we incentivized those doctors to go to that geographical area.
It's a really bad analogy, it didn't work, we still need it, remember.
I withdraw what I just did. I want to incentivize these teachers to stay in an urban jurisdiction.
Is there anyone that wishes to speak in opposition? Are there any questions and comments from committee? Any motion? I think it will have to go to finance. Is there a motion?
Second.
To refer to finance as well?
Correct.
All in favor? Aye.
I'm gonna abstain on this though.
And I think we made an error with, thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
I think we made an error with Senator McClellan's bill. That should be referred to finance as well. In the full committee, we do that, okay. Okay. Okay, wonderful. Okay, let's see. Senator Dees is here.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Senator.
I've got Senate Bill 619. Last year I had 1472 to require all teachers and other school personnel to complete a mental health first aid training or similar program. It's basically an 8-hour course. Concerns were raised about the burden this would place on our schools in terms of finding the time for more in-service training, our substitute teachers to cover classrooms, the cost of training. The bill before you today simply requires completion of mental health first aid or similar class for pre-service teachers obtaining initial licensure. Now, I think the bill will need an amendment because it's drafted, it's a little bit too broad, because I think it speaks to people teaching pre-certification, we intended to require teachers to complete an online module for renewals to catch those folks. Except, and grandfather existing teachers, as drafted, this bill would apply to all teachers seeking renewals, so we'll need a language change there. Youth mental health first aid is designed to teach parents, family members, caregivers, teachers, school staff, peers, neighbors, health, et cetera, how to help an adolescent who's experiencing mental health or addiction challenge or is in crisis. You know, I can tell you firsthand that kids between the age of most mental health onset comes somewhere between 18 and 24, 16 or 12 and 24 rather. And we've got a huge problem. I've had some young people from Albemarle County that really have a lot of ideas for things that would improve mental health services in the school setting. This would be a very simple thing to do. And like I said, last year I wanted it for everybody. That was too ambitious, too costly. This just says before you are licensed, I want you to have the training.
This is the bill on which I had dyslexia earlier and spoke to Bill.
Okay.
691, when it was really 619. I think I just had a suggestion from my locality, Senator Deeds, about not linking it to that initial licensing because it's such a burden to get through all the education that they have to go through already. And they were thinking about making it a little looser, that it could be done in a time frame relative to when they started.
And I'm not, I've got no, no corner on ideas. But last year, when I tried to make it apply to everybody, that was too costly, and so I was just thinking if I could get them in the beginning, and grandfather in existing teachers. So if you've got an idea, that's fine.
My locality said have it mandatory. I hesitate to say my idea because it's not really my idea, but because it includes all teachers. Mandatory for all teachers with a fixed time period from the time of the bill's passage and their hiring date would be a more reasonable model for professional development. And it could be done on a teacher's own time, sometime throughout the established time period.
Is there anyone that wishes to speak in favor of the bill?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Lucas Johnson with the Coalition for the Common Good. We've worked very closely with Senator Deeds in his office on this bill. We were the ones also trying to get through 1472 last year, and we've of course heard the concerns of the committee and especially yours, Senator Vance, and saying at the end that you really thought there was an area for us to work on, and we really think that 619 currently as it's written has an ability to ensure that enough teachers every year are getting the training, and so that within a time frame of a few years we can have solely a good base of teachers within all of our schools who have mental health first aid training. It's been implemented in numerous municipalities and school districts around the country, including at Fort Union Military Academy, where all of their educators and all of their staff members are trained in mental health first aid. There's definitely a lot of work that has been done in other countries as well. Australia and the UK have had millions of their citizens leaving schools, being taught this, and we really do think that when it comes down to new teachers, by having this prior to their time in a public school at their initial licensure, we have an ability then to sort of capture all these individuals who will have a great impact on those schools. And the time that it takes to take the course is, so minuscule to the amount of effect that you get in being able to understand when a student's in crisis, and especially when individuals who don't necessarily know how to help a student who's going through something as significant as mental health disorder. We need to ensure that teachers understand how to get help for their students, how to address the situation, and make sure that they're not reacting in a way that treats it as a behavioral issue or something for disciplinary concerns. And so the bill really does aim to make sure that we can have this every year. Roughly over the last 5-year period, we've had 8,266 initial licensures per year. Over 1 million people from 2009 to 2017, we had over 1 million Americans have mental health first aid training and get accredited. And we have over 12,000 individuals around the country who are licensed to teach mental health first aid. There is really no concern in terms of getting it. I have tried twice to get mental health first aid, and both times the classes were canceled here in the Commonwealth because there weren't enough people signed up to take it. And in the end, having this good repository of individuals to go off of, to utilize within schools and within the communities outside of their work lives, we have then this amazing opportunity to slowly but surely ensure individuals have this training for teachers. And unfortunately, my colleague, a second year at UVA, Alexander Moreno, was here to speak on behalf of it as well, but he had to leave, and so he left me this little statement for me to read. So in his own words, I would like to quickly add personal perspective in regards to this bill. When I was struggling with my mental health my junior year of high school, some of the people I was closer to were my teachers. I would eat lunch in their classrooms, I would go to them for advice, I would go to them for support. My teachers were there for me in a way I won't be able to forget. I'm grateful for what they were able to do for me, but it was hard for them to pick up on some of the nuances and warning signs I was picking up at the time. I don't expect mental health awareness training to step in and change the mental health environment overnight. However, speaking from my personal experience, it would have reassuring effect on me to know that the people I was talking to had comprehensive knowledge of mental health. As we move forward in the Commonwealth, I know that the new wave of teachers with mental health awareness training will be better equipped to do what they want to be doing, which is helping their students. I really do believe that this bill will help ensure that Virginia really does take mental health more seriously. Mental Health America has rated it as one of the worst states for youth mental health in the country, and in part because individuals just don't really know how to help students who are in crisis. And prior, Bruce Cruz, the Executive Director of Mental Health America Virginia, was here to speak on behalf of the bill. He gets to leave, unfortunately, but he wanted to let the committee know that he also supported it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anyone that wishes to speak in opposition or in favor?
Pauline Stewart with Virginia Academy of School Psychologists, and we are very much in favor of some mental health awareness training, and to be able to make that available to everyone in the school division. We have looked around the state, and there are places who are already doing this. And there are several bills in the other body that we have worked on that are very similar to this one. So we are in support of mental health awareness training, and I suppose that these two bills will eventually come together and get brought into one bill. But we like the flexibility of not saying specifically mental health awareness training, because that's a particular program, and there are other divisions who have other programs already in place.
I think she was referring to mental health first aid.
So
it's the same.
Can you remind me what the mental health first aid training is? Is it online? How long is it?
It's usually an 8-hour course.
So is it a specific single, I mean, is there just one thing that is?
I can't answer that, but I know that usually, CSBs will offer the course periodically around the state.
And I'm trying to remember a conversation last year. I understand it's nice to name a program that you're very familiar with, but with respect to the decentralization we have of the schools, and some are already doing mental health training, instead of them abandoning what they already have in place, would it be better to just say, come up with a term that doesn't apply to a specific class that they have to take, but maybe another kind of,
I would certainly be amenable to that.
that the school division starts. I don't know what the language would be for that, but it looks like some people want here to do.
I'll have Mr. Malloy speak, because Fairfax is one that has a really good program in place, and it's very workable.
Madam Chair, Senator Donovan, Senator Deeds, Michael Malloy, Fairfax County Schools. We do have mental health awareness training. We actually have multiple versions of it. I think mental health awareness training might be the kind of generic terminology that you're looking for. Mental health first aid is a very specific program. It's 8 hours long. The reason that it's expensive is because it's done in person. It's done in smaller classes, maybe 30 to 40 people in a class. It has to be taught by certified trainers. So we have a number of personnel in Fairfax who have gone through that training, but it's not a universal trainer. We use a different program. It's an online module, and that's where the mental health awareness training kind of terminology comes from. That we put all of our personnel through, all of our teachers and others that have contact with students. It provides more flexibility. Our teachers have given us really positive feedback on it because it gives them more information about student mental health issues, how to deal with them, but also when to recognize signs that a student might need referral to professionals who can handle the issues a little bit more directly.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, sorry, but in terms of the bill as it's currently written, it doesn't require that mental health first aid be taught. It says that mental health first aid or a similar program. So there is that openness for an ability for other programs to be supplemented as opposed to mental health first aid. Mental health first aid is definitely considered the gold standard for mental health awareness training, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Kathy Birch with the Virginia Education Association. We are opposed to the approach taken, and certainly, and goodness knows you'll have heard me up here over and over again about the need to put more school counselors, social workers, psychologists on the ground in our schools, folks who have gone through extensive training and graduate level coursework on dealing with student mental health. We have a couple of big concerns. That uppercase mental health first aid, as you heard, is an 8-hour course. This would be required for all pre-service teachers. And this, again, with the burden, yes, isn't put on school divisions, but it's put on students trying to enter a teacher education program. I'm going to give you an example just so you understand the impact. A good friend of mine, her daughter, her whole life is wanting to be a special education teacher. Her sophomore year at James Madison University, she wasn't able to get into the CPR course offered by JMU as a requirement for entry into the program. She called every firehouse in Harrisonburg and the nearby area. Her mom called me and said, what does she do? Luckily, Dr. Rashan was the head of the School of Education at the time and a good friend of mine. I called him and he made a space for her, but we could have lost her because if you don't get into those programs because of the way they're structured, you actually have no room for error. You have to gain entry your sophomore year in order to graduate in the amount of time necessary. So I just worry that this kind of mandate on all pre-service teachers, which are about 8,000 that we graduate every year in Virginia, this would actually stop some students from being able to enter the teaching profession, and so we are very concerned about that.
Madam Chair, Thompson, Superintendent Association. First off, a question from what I've heard, because I've heard a couple of things here. Does this apply to all existing teachers?
As we intended it to be for people coming into the profession. I think it's so broad that we intended to grandfather existing teachers, but the language right now probably would apply to anyone applying for renewal. And so that could apply to some teachers that have been off for a year or two, and I would certainly.
For recertification?
Yes, I would certainly be looking to change.
The concern we have is cost and time. 8 hours is an instructional day. Typically, school divisions would provide this in an in-service day. Those days are roughly $200 a day per teacher. So there's going to be, about that times, I can't, there are 100,000 teachers, but not everybody's taking it at the same time. But so that kind of cost would multiply. If we were going to do this, we would ask the state to put some money into it to help us train that. And I would think also the teacher training institutions would probably like to see some state money to help fund that straight also.
Are there any questions and comments from
You know, the language, again, on line 102, complete a mental health first aid training or similar program. And, you know, you can strike that in every person seeking renewal of a license, but, you know, and you can strike that from the bill, but it still has to be something developed and approved or approved by the Department of Education. So this is not, you know, I've tried to respond last year. I got concerns about the cost because I wanted all teachers to go through this 8-hour program, and so I tried to respond to that. The concern still remains. I think this is as flexible as you can get. These kids, there are a lot of kids out there that are really struggling. You know that as well as I do. And our schools are school. Well, when teens end their lives, that's a tough thing. Seems to be more prevalent than we would like.
that they recognize warning signs of a problem without being so prescriptive that it thwarts their entering a training program or is a, rigorous in person. Now, I guess schools can decide if they wanna do it online, but, I think what you really want is that teachers periodically get reminded of the warning signs of bad mental health things, because none of us wanna miss them. But I don't think this bill does that, and I think it's caught up in some language and some particular courses and, commitment to those courses, and I'm not even sure if this is the right part of the code to put in something like, mental health, ongoing training. I look at what they say for school counselors, and they kind of say training in the recognition of mental health disorder. I mean, that's extensive for a counselor, but I'm just trying to, I don't know.
No, I understand, and I think I share the same concerns. Again, the intent of the bill, I fully support. We all agree that there is a greater need to provide more training and resources for teachers who are front line on really the crisis that we're facing in our school systems. I'm not sure that this will get at what you want to achieve. Tying it into the initial licensure of a teacher may create additional roadblocks, and also the kind of burden it places on teachers to be responsible, that once they go through a training, then ultimately they hold that critical responsibility of being the ones to identify students in situations of mental health crisis. We certainly need to increase our school psychologists and counselors.
You don't have one of those in every classroom.
We don't, unfortunately.
I do think there's like a basic, mental health awareness class for teachers that would empower them and help them feel well equipped. I just don't know where it goes.
I don't know either. I'm afraid I can't support this particular bill.
Thank you very much.
Would you like to work on it for a week as a
If you're gonna meet
proposition?
for a week, I could try that, yes.
Okay, we'll pass it by for a week then. Thank you, Senator. Suderline is the only one.
I believe they're on the last bill in transportation. He's gonna come over as quickly as he can.
It's okay.
Thank you, though. You did. Good. I'm gonna check it out. Yes. There's not a practice that I you get paid 4 payments. If I'm gonna buy a pair of shoes, I'm going, something's going on.
I looked at them and my brain went now.
Okay. Katie says we're ready to go to like game changer. She told me I could bring
Up your finger. Use my divider by 200, divided by. I can't change that. What you said was 8 hours, that was easy.
But not, but most of our subcommittee, I'll go over
Started.
All right, that's that's amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm just telling you, not having testimony in committee is. We used to do it here and then there.
That's my go-to.
Had education and health this year.
It just goes in.
We had a like one.
Just did it.
We are. They were like, wow, that's huge, so now it's 169.
I understand it was already gonna die.
Well, yeah.
Oh, that was another bill.
It's just something. What'd you say?
I don't, I can finish that.
Oh, okay.